Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Education Podcast after a long break. Today, we're embarking on a journey to enlighten us on climate education. Our guest is Bryce Kuhn, the Director of Climate Education at FD. With a wealth of experience and passion for environmental stewardship, Bryce is at the forefront of empowering communities with the knowledge and tools to tackle climate change heads on. Stay tuned as we cover the strategies, challenges, and transformative potential of climate education in shaping a more sustainable future for all. I'm Abdulsalam Amo. Let's get along. Hello, Bryce.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome. Could you please take us through what climate education is all about?
Yeah, sure. So climate education is teaching young people about the causes of the climate crisis and the solutions and making sure that they're thinking of it in all of their courses. So not just their science classes, but thinking about it in every subject they take to think about how it's affecting people and how we can work together to solve this problem.
On April 22, to mark the Earth Day for 2024, what were the highlights of the 2024 edition?
It's a great question. So our theme for the year was planet versus plastics. So we did a lot of work around uh, raising awareness around the concerns of plastic, single-use plastic, and microplastics and how they're affecting the health of human health. So, aside from education, we had people advocating, working on the plastics treaty. We went up to Ottawa and had some campaigns there. In terms of education, we partnered with some amazing organizations, one specifically subject to climate based in Boston, Massachusetts, and we developed a lot of materials and shared those materials with teachers so that they could start teaching more climate education today.
All right. So, what's the current state of climate education based on your 11-year experience in this subject?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. We actually recently wrote a report called Climate Education versus the Climate Crisis. So if anyone, really wants to do a deep dive on this subject and, read a 20-page report on it, we have that on our website. And it goes through what the current state is. And it really depends on what country you're in. So, some countries like Chile, Ireland, Italy, have been leaders in climate education, have integrated climate education throughout their curriculum. Most countries have not. The majority of countries have not. And, specifically being based in the United States, looking at, our education system along with, other federalized countries such as Germany and Canada, it's left up to the states or provinces how they run their education system. So, even within a country, it can be very, very complicated and it can be very different from one state or one region to another.
So, do you have any idea about what the situation is in Africa?
I know that, I was actually just reading and talking to my colleague in Zimbabwe about, some of the work that's being done in Africa. And there are, a handful of countries are, have climate education in place and are leading. And, from our point, we're just trying to, highlight those successes and then also just have conversations with education and environmental ministers, to increase access to climate education.
What strategies or initiatives have you implemented at Earth Day to enhance climate education outreach?
Well, one of the main strategies is to, well, start by just convincing people why they need climate education. And so anytime, whatever the strategy is, that we're kind of guided by our three pillars. And those pillars are, we call it climate well-being, which is, thinking about how young people are thinking about the environmental crisis. we talk about something called green muscle memory, which is the fact that learning about your environment and how to protect it can actually lead to behavior changes. And so, young people might start making more sustainable decisions. And then lastly, what works, what resonates, I should say, or speaks to some ministers maybe more than others is the jobs angle. So thinking about how there's this growing green economy and we want to make sure that it's not dominated by a single country or a single region, and that people all over the world have access to that green economy and the economic growth that it'll bring. One of our main initiatives is working through the United Nations framework and having countries include climate education into their NDCs, so they're kind of promises for what they are going to accomplish, and that once it's in the NDC, they can start to hopefully get funding for that or institutional support.
Let's get into tailoring this climate education programs to the various demographics and age groups. What are the strategies around this?
That's a great question, and I think that one of the things to consider is how we talk about climate education to children of different ages, because the way you're going to talk about this to a 5-year-old is going to be very different than the way you might talk about it to a 17 or an 18-year-old. And I don't pretend to be an expert and know exactly how to do that. And I think that's one of the reasons why we need to have an office, or at least a person in each education system dedicated to convening experts in this topic. So again, I don't know how to talk to, exactly how to talk to a 5-year-old about the climate crisis. But a child psychologist would have some advice that we could take. And so just bringing in the science experts and the mental health experts, just bring everyone together to come up with, what does that look like? And I think in terms of demographics, it's, important that we are providing young people with climate education that speaks to them, that is relevant to their geographic region. So domestically in the United States right now, we are working on a project which will highlight youth leaders in the climate crisis, or fighting the climate crisis in Latin America. And so to highlight Spanish speaking advocates and bring those voices to Spanish speaking students in the United States. Because, if you look at, there is diversity in it, but if you look at a lot of the top voices, youth voices, or the messaging, at least in the United States, that young people are getting, it's not always a very diverse group of voices.
How much of the experts are currently involved in the workings of Earth Day in making this climate education, and considering the fact that there are usually changes, science is always evolving, and things are always getting up to date from time to time? How much of the experts are involved in the workings of Earth Day?
That's a great question. We consult with experts, and we have talked to educational psychologists about how we talk about climate education, how it can lead to behavioral changes. But I don't think Earth Day is going to be convening the experts for every state in the United States or every country in Africa. I think that's why it's so important that the states have local experts that understand their region and come together. So we have had conversations with some experts. We have a series called 22 Minutes With, which is a 22-minute interview that we do with an expert. And so I did one of those with Dr. Janet Swim, who is a climate change psychologist, and we discussed some of these topics and got some of her recommendations. But we, encourage the people who are, we're advocating for climate education, but there are people like in the state of New Jersey that has K through 12 climate education. There are people whose job it is to develop the specific standards, and they're really getting into the details. And that's where I think we need to have the voices of the experts.
What role do you think technology can play in all these advancements of climate education outreach?
That's another great question. I think, thinking about that project I was talking about earlier, where we're going to connect some of our Spanish speaking students in the United States with students or climate leaders in Latin America, that's going to be possible through technology. We're going to have videos of, these students sharing their experiences and what they're doing. And then, in a moment, we can, send those voices out all over the country. So technology makes it easier in terms of, connecting people. Like I mentioned, you asked me about climate education in Africa, and I talked to my colleague in Zimbabwe this morning. We were sending emails, so it just makes it makes it so much easier to advocate. And then there's other using technologies in the classroom. One of my colleagues was a middle school teacher before he joined our team, and he taught in Los Angeles in California, and they were heavily impacted by the wildfires. But just from the smoke of it, right? Because they were in the city, the fires weren't there. And he used virtual reality headsets that he was able to get into his classroom. And he showed the students what the wildfires looked like and the fighting of it, and it made it much more real for them. And so it's the ability to use technology to have students make those connections to what's happening, how our planet, our environment and our people and other species are being affected by the climate crisis.
All right. We understand that there are skeptics to the subject of climate change. We have individuals that are resistant to all these efforts. How do we convince them through education?
We do have we have a population of, around the world, we do in the United States, we do of climate change deniers. And, education is key to helping people understand, why this is a real threat and coming up with the solutions for it. I think to some extent, this is one of the reasons why the jobs aspect is appealing, looking at the green jobs, because, if you live in a community that, is experiencing higher temperatures but has a lot of sun, then understanding like, okay, how can you, make young people care about this and harness the sun and, develop, solar panels and, get some of those benefits. So yeah, in terms of adults, I think it's about trying to meet them closer to where they are. But for young people, it's just presenting them with the facts that this is, man-made, and we have the evidence. It's no longer a question, and here's why. Here's the data.
Okay. What efforts are in place for climate education at the higher education level, at colleges and universities, especially?
At the college and university level, it varies a lot. There are programs. University of Barcelona has a really cool program they initiated recently where every student that goes to the University of Barcelona takes a climate change module. So it's not embedded into all the subjects like we advocate for, but it ensures that every student there is receiving some climate education. I've talked with some universities and university systems here in the United States, and there are varying degrees of climate education, but some systems are definitely working on programs, and in the next couple of years, I think we'll see those be rolled out, and I think that'll be really exciting and something for us to bring attention to.
Just want to we were talking about your colleague in Zimbabwe earlier. Do you have any office in Nigeria, or do you have operations in Nigeria at all? And what are your efforts in Nigeria so far?
We don't. Yeah. So at the moment, we have our one colleague in Zimbabwe, and he does travel throughout the continent a decent amount, and he is very you know, he's kind of our expert, and he's very aware of what is happening in Nigeria. But and when I've been at some of the climate conferences, I've spoken with people from Nigerian youth advocates, and uh, it's it's really important. It would be ideal if we could have a representative in every country. That would be that would be amazing.
What are the common misconceptions that people have about climate change that you have encountered, and how do you think that this can be addressed?
I think one of the misconceptions among young people is that it's too late, that we can't solve this crisis, and so we should just kind of give up. And that's not true. But we are at a moment where we don't have much time. The United Nations climate expert recently said we have about 2 years to get our act together and make some changes. So we don't have tons of time, but we can't give up, right? We just have to be optimistic. We have to instill optimism and opportunities for young people to innovate solutions to the climate crisis. So, I think about if we think about with AI, everything that's happened in the last year or two, right? Like just the tremendous progress that at least people became aware of. Right, when we start applying that new technology and other new technologies to solutions, we might see change happen at a speed quicker than previously anticipated, and that's excellent. So I think we need to keep that optimism.
And keeping to the optimism, let's talk about some of the successful case studies or projects that you've carried out with regards to climate education and how they've impacted communities or policymakers.
Yeah, I mean, success stories in the United States, we really focus on the state of New Jersey, which is the first state to have integrated climate education K through 12 in all of their schools in all subjects. Um, it's still relatively new, so in terms of data on how it's affected communities, we're not there yet. But I don't can't think of any of them off the top of my head. But speaking with some of the representatives from the state, they have this a lot of stories of young people who have learned something or become very passionate about solving the climate crisis.
What are some of the most important concepts or topics that should be included in a comprehensive climate education curriculum?
I think throughout I talked earlier about the three pillars, which are the climate well-being, the green muscle memory, behavior changes, and the green technology and skills, or kind of the jobs angle. And I think it's really important that all of those have an equity lens. So we think about how the climate crisis is affecting different groups of people in different areas of the world uniquely. I kind of remember when I was in high school. I grew up in Michigan, which is a northern state surrounded by the Great Lakes, just massive bodies of fresh water. So a lot of the talk about climate change when I was 14 years old, water scarcity, increasing temperatures, those weren't very alarming to me because I was surrounded by fresh water. And if anything, it was just too cold all the time. But, that's a very closed-minded point of view. And I don't, I forgive myself for that because I was a child. I was 14. But that's the role of education, is to have teachers in that say, okay, well, we're not talking about you, right? We're talking about how this, the climate crisis is going to affect women and other marginalized communities to a greater extent than others. And, depending on, the country and their ability to respond to a climate disaster. So I think equity needs to be embedded in all the standards.
What do you envision as the future of climate education, and what steps can individuals and organizations take in achieving all this?
I see climate education in schools the same way that many schools have embedded technology into all of their courses. So, that might not be the case in every school, but I can speak as a former teacher in the United States. I can speak to my experiences, which were when I was in school, we had a computer class. And then we went to our other classes and we didn't really engage with computers or technology. Now, when I was teaching, computers and technology were embedded in every subject area. Even if it was just me showing, some interesting data or some visual on the screen, we were using it in the class. There's still a computer class, but it's embedded in all classes. And it's just kind of taken for granted, at least in the school I taught at. And so I see climate education hopefully becoming the same thing, where it's just a part of the curriculum. An English teacher would be like, of course I'm going to teach about the climate crisis and how it's impacting people. Of course I'm going to mention, that when I'm, like I had a friend of mine who's a middle school English teacher, and she was teaching a book, Long Walk to Water, and the book, discusses water scarcity. And I asked her if she was making any connections with the climate crisis, and she said, no, I hadn't thought of it, but I will, right? And so just want that to be standard, that you have that, like, what are the connections to the climate crisis?
Thank you very much for joining us. Right, cool. Thank you very much for joining us to discuss climate change.
Thank you.
Climate change.
Great questions.
Hopefully, we would have to discuss this at some other time. So, please, before you leave, what will be your parting shot?
I just, I hope everyone, I guess I didn't fully answer your last question, that everyone finds ways to advocate for climate education. So if you're a student or a parent, asking your school what they can do, trying to get that included, and then, finding who the leaders are in the community, whether it's a school board, a principal, a school board, something at the state or country level, or joining us and calling for countries to put climate education in their NDCs.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Those are great questions. I hope I answered them well enough for you.
Thank you. So
thank you.
Hopefully we'll discuss more, catch up with other episodes of the education podcasts on various platforms, and we can also catch up with our education news on educeleb.com. I've been the host, Abdulsalam Amo. Bye for now.
Head out. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.